first of all, let's kind of set the stage here for where President Trump's mind is, because we're now in day 17. And I think when this started, I think that the most likely case scenario in his mind that this was going to be 3 to 4 days. We're going to have a decapitation strike, that they were going to give in because they were as weak as they had been in 47 years. And all you need is a bunch of shock and awe, and bam, it's going to be over. Whoops, that didn't happen. And so now the question is, do we have the staying power? Do we have the ammunition? Are we going to wear out our forces? Those are questions people are asking. Well, President Trump thought he was going to calm everybody's nerves this weekend when he said this.
What we do have, though, is at a very high level, we have unlimited weapons at a medium to high level. And they're really doing the trick. And we're not using they call it the elite weapons, because frankly, they haven't, outside of the original attack, they haven't been necessary. But these companies are building facilities, and they've already started all over many of them are building many buildings right now to make so that we wait 2 weeks instead of 2 years for weapons.
Well, that's a remarkable thing. Now we only have to wait 2 weeks for weapons instead of 2 years. That's great news. What do you say to that?
Well, again, not knowing the details of what of what he's talking about, but being somewhat familiar with defense industry, I had the privilege of being a START treaty coordinator, and also during the INF inspections early on in the counterintelligence stage, I coordinated with major defense industry, companies throughout the country that could be peripherally involved or directly involved in the inspection process, and then I've been studying, for instance, Soviet defense industry for some time now, and now Russian defense industry. So I have I have a modicum of knowledge about this. The president is just not being honest. I mean, he's saying, they're building buildings. I mean, and I know, just living in a neighborhood, watching housing go up around here, how long it takes to put a building down, pour a foundation, put the stuff up. It's far more complicated for a defense industry facility. I mean, there are safety regulations that have to be done, site surveys that have to be done. You just don't snap your fingers and make this happen. And the money has to come from somewhere. Companies don't build infrastructure on their own. Very rarely do you get a company say, we're going to bet on the come here, and we're going to go ahead and build this in the hope that we get the contract and that Congress will appropriate money. And that's the important thing. Congress has to appropriate this money. The last time I checked, that hasn't happened. So the president is talking strategic theory. You have companies saying they're ready to put, to start building foundations. But even once you get the building constructed, you've got to put the production equipment in there. And some of it's pretty unique. The people capable of operating the equipment, train them up to the standard necessary. There are security clearances involved, supply chains involved. There's not an infinite amount of the materials necessary, including some materials that can be singularly derived or solely derived, procured from China. When we get into these precision guided munitions, et cetera. So the president is just dead wrong when he says what he's saying is that, they've created a strategic intent to increase the scope and scale of defense industrial capacity, but they're nowhere near that. These weapons will not be ready for years, if at all.
And that's something I wanted to ask you, because you have some familiarity with what the Russians did here. From the outside, I was able to observe things that were reported. And when Russia made its initial incursion into Ukraine in February 2022, I think that they also thought that it was going to be a short-term operation, that they were going to get a negotiated settlement. I'm not talking about the strategy, not now, but they thought that it wasn't going to last a long time. And then when it became clear that that's not going to happen, now it's plan B, they had to start ramping up their industrial capacity. And then they had to go on the defensive for the better part of a year, 2023. And after that point, at least it observed from the outside that for about 18 months later, once the demand signal was sent from the Kremlin, that to their industrial capacity, which went into overdrive to try to build new factories and hire new people and all that kind of stuff, it took about a year and a half before they were really starting to have production level. Is that accurate? And do you think that is commensurate with what could be here if we had the same demand signal?
Well, the thing about you're first of all, you're very correct in what you've said. Let's dig a little bit deeper.
And we seem to have a bit of a glitch there. Whoop, there we go. There, we got him back.
I think the FBI might be upset that we're talking about these issues, but so what? The Russians aren't like we are. They during the Soviet Union times, defense industry weren't private corporations; they were state-owned enterprises. And even during the transition after the close of the Soviet Union, when they did become private, they didn't function at all. So what happened when Vladimir Putin became president is they began to transform the defense industrial base into what they call joint stock companies, where the Russian government would come in and procure the greater shares. So these companies, although they have a private aspect to it, and they're somewhat of a profit margin under normal times operating, at the end of the day, the government controls them and directs them. And what happened is when they went to the mobilization is that the government directed that certain things be done. The other thing is, for instance, in Votkinsk is a facility I'm intimately familiar with because I worked there for 2 years outside the factory inspecting everything that came in and came out. And I've been following Votkinsk very closely. When the Cold War ended and the demand or the ability to procure quantities of ballistic missiles dropped significantly, rather than getting rid of capacity, they mothballed it. They mothballed capacity. They retrained engineers, but they held on to their capability. And this speaks volumes. Many of these engineers, rather than going for better jobs, stayed there because they're patriots. But they also lived there. They had their homes there. They had their families there. But they didn't flee. They went ahead and tightened their belts. They stuck it out with the company because the company had been loyal to them for many years. And when it came time to up production capacity, you could turn to engineers who already had about 80% of the training necessary. You could send them through a technical engineering course, which the factory has. They have their own in-house university, and they train them up to speed. And you can get a production line up and running relatively quickly, quicker than we can. And these are facilities that have already been cleared for the work. These guys are cleared to do it. You just need to start. You have to hit the on switch. So the Russians were able to rapidly transition into, production. And this is a system also that is constantly in working. Unlike the United States, where we build a system, we fit the contract, and then we're done. With the Russians, they'll build a missile, let's say the SS-25 when I was there. They're already, while the SS-25 is going through serial production, working on the follow-on system. And they're taking cadres of people out, training them up so that at the 20-year mark, when the SS-25 is kaput, they've already tested the next follow-on, and they're ready to transition into full-scale production. So the Russians are always 2 or 3 steps ahead in terms of generational capacity, which means they're prepared. It's like they're in the gym training for a fight. It's not like if I did a championship fight, building the Minuteman III, then I go sit on the couch and eat donuts. I'm just getting fat. The Russians, they built their missile, but they're still in the ring training for the next one. And they were able to make this transition very rapidly. Whereas the United States, we're bound by so many restrictions. It's just the nature of the business. But one of the biggest restrictions is financing. Where's the money coming from? You can't train people. You can't hire people unless you have the money. And what are you buying for? Traditionally, we don't buy large volumes of these missiles because we weren't at war. And the reality is people are going to say, Congress is going to say, how long do you expect this war to go? Once we build up our stocks, do we really need to build 4 production lines to produce these missiles, knowing that in 2 years we'll, if the rates are up, we're up. And now what do we do with these production lines? The United States doesn't mothball. We don't put things in reserve. We don't have people saying we're willing to hang around for 10 years and take a pay cut. They want to move on to getting the full pay. So this is an unrealistic plan. It hasn't been subjected to congressional scrutiny, and I don't think it'll survive.
And so that leads to the issue then in the United States then, if it still took Russia about 18 months to really get up to where they were having production at scale to be able to support the higher up tempo of the special military operation, as the Russians call it, we would seem to be in a lot more difficult position because, as you say, the president and Congress, nobody can tell them how long this is going to last. They're talking 3 to 4 weeks. That's not the kind of signal it's going to cause you to create new capacity unless you're just talking general. But something like the Russians did, they said, no, we have to get this kind of capacity. They knew, at least I would imagine, they had a pretty good idea that this was going to take a long time after the initial plan didn't work. But without those signals in the United States, I don't know how we get bigger that fast. And then we seem to have so many more constraints. I don't know that in 18 months from now, we can be at a level to where President Trump thinks we're going to be. How do you see it?
Oh, I can almost guarantee in 18 months, nothing will be coming off the production line that isn't already ready to come off the production line. There won't be a new production line. There won't be new equipment. So again, President Trump, whether this is deliberate or just based upon ignorance, he is a salesman. He is right now trying to sell a concept to a very skeptical audience, especially his political base. He's somebody who is postured as America's the strongest nation in the world, and suddenly America's confronting the reality that we're not. That there's some problems here. That we're not the 10-foot tall monster we thought we were. We're actually about 5'6" and a little overweight. Not able to sustain the fight.
I'm sorry, 5'6" and overweight. That's just not a good imagery, but I think accurate. Sorry,
but sorry about that. But the fact is, there's other issues too. What are we building? We literally just found out that the totality of our what he calls, whatever term he used, the super duper, the best, the tier one, the top level, it doesn't work. It fails. So he's talking about building production lines that are going to build weapons we already know don't work. So even if all this stuff happens, the weapons he'll be producing don't accomplish the mission. So we're not solving the problem. Again, to give you another example of the Russians, the way their whole system works, especially now with the special military operation, they have a team right there in the production team getting feedback from the front lines about, hey, they've improved their air defense this way. We're running into a problem here. And that team sits down with and they work out a solution, and then they sit there in the production line and they tinker the production line as they speak. So they stop producing the missiles that don't work because the enemy found a solution to them. They hold the ones that they produced and get them back in to be modified, and they begin producing missiles that now can overcome that. The turnaround for the Russians is literally measured in a matter of weeks. So they'll have something within weeks. They'll have a weapon system on the battlefield that already defeats the tactic that's been emerged. That's how they do. We don't work that way. We tried. If anybody familiar with Afghanistan and Iraq, we had the counter mine thing where we put a lot of money into adapting vehicles, et cetera. Look at the timelines associated with that and the procurement associated with that. And it's very lengthy. The Russians, we didn't sit there and come up with the MRAP in a week. That didn't happen. Well, the Russians will come up with a modified Iskander in a week, a modified caliber in a week, because they have teams out there right now who are doing the product evaluation, getting the intelligence feedback, and continuously communicating with the chief designer in the factory to ensure that the weapon systems that are being procured by the government to be given to the military to fight this war are the best possible weapon systems. This isn't how we work. We're getting ready. If we want to upgrade the Patriot, we've got to let a contract out to the to the manufacturer who put together a Tiger team who will then drag this thing out, get as much money as they can, come up with modifications. They'll have to test them out because they have legal issues. They have to make sure that they're legally. And by the time they're ready to put a software update into the system, we're talking a year and a half later after the problem has been identified. Could you imagine going to war for a year and a half with a weapon system that doesn't work? And that's what we're getting ready to do. Everything we're getting ready to procure isn't going to work. We already know it doesn't work. So you can build the best Patriot PAC-3 you want. You can build the most advanced THAAD you want. They don't work against the threats that are out there. So again, the president is behind the Powerball on this one.
Yeah, and I can give firsthand experience with that with when I worked in the Future Combat Systems program while I was still on active duty, and I saw the absolute absence of any kind of a system to do that. They already had in their mind what they were going to build and what the end state was going to be, and actions didn't make any difference. Even looking at combat experiences of other nations around, and eventually, like even the 2020 war in Armenia and Azerbaijan, that didn't factor into anything. We don't have a system for it. We just have a contract, and the contract has to be executed. We're doing the same thing today by all accounts. Now, I'm not in there now. I don't know if they changed it, but the evidence is that we haven't, which means we are setting ourselves up for disaster if we run into somebody like Russia or China who does have that kind of a system. We'll see where that goes. One of the things, though, Scott, that we're trying to do to try to mitigate some of that, I think Trump knows whatever he says out loud, that it's going to take a long time to try to get more ammunition, weapons, and everything else out the door. So now he's trying to say, all right, for this short-term or this near-term problem we got with Strait of Hormuz open, we're going to need some help, and we're going to need it from our allies. So now he's looking to NATO and trying to cajole them into joining the fray.
We're always there for NATO. We're helping them with Ukraine. And it's got a notion that between us doesn't affect us, but we've helped them. It'd be interesting to see what country wouldn't help us with a very small endeavor, which is just keeping the strait open by comparison.
So that's all we're asking, Scott. Something easy, like just keep the strait open. What do you say to that?
Who among you is ready to commit suicide on my behalf? That's literally what he's asking. If it was that easy, we would have done it. I mean, we have the force capacity right there. You don't need to go to NATO and get, shipping that's inferior to ours. We have, the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. We have, very good class cruisers. We have aircraft carriers that can provide air cover. We should just be able to, if it's this easy for Donald Trump to sail in and sweep the straits. Except it's not that easy. If we tried to do that, we'd lose every single ship we sent in there. They wouldn't make it to the gauntlet. And fortunately for the Europeans, they're smart enough to understand them. And unfortunately for the president, you don't start a war of choice, which is also an illegal war of aggression. And then 17 days later, when everything's going bad, start saying, hey, who's here? Who's going to come and help me? You didn't talk to them beforehand. You ignored them. You belittled them. And now you need help and you want them to come. I mean, this is why, I say Netanyahu, but it's the same thing. Trump's form of diplomacy has failed. The arrogance of the United States in saying we're the best, we're the superpower, nobody's as good as we are, we don't need you. And suddenly we find out that we do need them, and they're not ready to come to our aid. And now the president has said some other things too, such as if NATO doesn't come to our assistance, this might be the end of NATO. Which I actually think is probably the direction we're going here. So this may very well be the end of the NATO alliance. I thought it would be triggered over Ukraine, but it appears it's going to be triggered over Iran.
Yeah, matter of fact,
Europe is due.
I want to add something to that on that point there, because what the U.S. America's ambassador to NATO, Ambassador Whitaker, went out, I think, to double down on President Trump's statements. And I'd like you to listen to it from this perspective. It sounds to me like if you're on the receiving end of this and you're on one of our NATO allies, this is not going to make you want to come to our defense, but it might make you say maybe we should be thinking about going our separate ways.
President Trump has made NATO stronger, has encouraged our NATO allies to do more, to spend 5% on their defense, and we need strong, lethal European allies, plus Canada, to address their own conventional defense and allow them to project power. I mean, remember, the United States of America right now is the global superpower. We are the ones that can do these types of efforts. But at the same time, if we had allies that were equally strong, that could bring real capabilities like warships to the fight, that would make us all stronger and make us be able to defend our people even better.
Yeah, so he's basically saying, I mean, to your point that you said a second ago about wanting somebody to come and commit suicide, it's like, hey, we need you guys to come and do this because we're not going to with our Navy, so we need you to come over here, and you should because we're the superpower. I mean, that's almost that. It's not circular logic. It's almost like diverging logic. I don't get it. How do you see it?
There was a series, I don't know if you're familiar with it, maybe some people in your audience are, Game of Thrones. And my daughters and I were addicted to it, so we'd watch it every Sunday. But there was a scene in there where the young new king was shouting out, I am the king! I am the king! And his father, who was his consultant, said, any man who has to say I am the king is not a king. And I will say that any man that has to say the United States is a superpower means we're not a superpower. Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick. What we see from the Trump administration exclusively, from the president on down, are people who are out there just cheerleading for themselves, telling us all about how great they are. If we're that great, it's self-evident, therefore you don't have to say it. If we're that great, we would have cleared the strait already and not be turning to our NATO allies who were never tasked with building fleets, cape sailing around the world to clear straits. I mean, this isn't their mission.
I think your dogs could clear the strait, I think.
My dogs could clear the world. There's a postman delivering mail to my door. There's not a damn thing I shut these dogs up except shoot them, and then I'd get in trouble. Plus, I love them. But hopefully they'll stop barking soon. You know? They're 2 Pomeranians and a Chihuahua. I mean, I couldn't have picked dogs that bark more.
I've had some similar experience. Well, while you're contemplating that, let me play one more soundbite here, because let's take a look at the reaction here, because this is Keir Starmer. Instead of saying, "Oh yes, sir, Mr. President, we're coming right to your aid," he said this:
"While taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war. We will keep working towards a swift resolution that brings security and stability back to the region and stops the Iranian threat to its neighbours."
Now, that's classic Keir Starmer saying a bunch of nonsense that has no relevance to reality. But he does say we are not going to get in this war. So if he's saying that, and let me just toss this one up on the screen, Germany says the same thing. The Germany's government rejects U.S. President Donald Trump's demand that NATO allies help secure the Strait of Hormuz, declaring that the alliance has no place in this war. This war has nothing to do with NATO. It's almost like they listen to you. It's not NATO's war. I mean, what more do you have to have from 2 of your absolute key allies saying that kind of stuff? What does that tell you about our influence right now, America's influence, even in NATO?
Well, even the French come out and said, hey, this is not planned. I think it was the Latvians that said they might provide a which would be interesting. But I mean, it's curious. What NATO is saying, or the Germans and the British are saying is, hey, we're busy committing suicide here in Ukraine. We don't have time to commit suicide with you in Iran. You know, they are so heavily committed to the Ukraine narrative that there can be no diversion. They're still trying to figure out how they're going to come up with 90 billion euro to subsidize Ukraine. They don't have, they've talked about building this massive 800,000 man army, unified army. They still can't get a 300,000 rapid deployment force put together. They have no ability to, put more than 12 to 20,000 troops into Ukraine, unsustainable on a best day. So the Europeans are used to, saying things they can't do. And so at least they're smart enough to know that they're just overstretched, that they've got no resources whatsoever, military, economic, or political. I mean, how do you explain this to your people? Although, because the people will start to say, wait a minute, you're going to go to Strait of Hormuz, right? Yes. And you're going to open it up. Yep. Because it's strangling our economy. Yep. Because we gave up on Russian energy because of you, and now we're a prisoner to Middle Eastern energy and we can't get it, right? So why don't we get Russian energy again? That's the problem that the Europeans are already into. They have to be careful because there's already in Germany, there's a remaining Nord Stream pipeline that works. And all you have to do is put the on switch on, and a lot of Europe's gas problems go away. The same thing with oil. You can just turn on the oil pipelines and it's there. And as Europe starts to stew in the results of its own stupidity, as prices go through the roof, as they start to have energy crises and emergencies, you're going to see the people saying, hey, I don't care where it comes from. We just need it right now. And if you don't give it to us right now, you're done. And no politician wants to hear the you're done from an enraged citizenry. So, Europe, there's nothing they can do to open the Strait of Hormuz. They know that. They don't have the military capacity to do it. The United States doesn't. The best way to get the Strait of Hormuz open right now is what the Europeans are doing, talking to the Iranians. You see, behind the scenes, the Europeans are already talking to them to get ships out with energy that can come to Europe.
Yeah, I've seen both Italy and France, I think. We're talking about that. Spain is not real happy about any of this stuff here. We just see a fracturing of our alliance anyway. But I want to tap into your experience as a Marine Corps officer. So you have some understanding, especially of littoral combat operations. I wonder if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about it. I'm going to ask 2 questions about this. First of all, from a position of trying to force open the Strait of Hormuz, given its very narrow band in there, but also the hundreds of miles of shoreline leading into that horseshoe bend that would all have to become under constraint. Let's say that everybody that Trump called And weirdly, even let's say China added their ships too. That's ridiculous. We'll talk about China separately. But let's say that everybody else, South Korea, Japan, France, UK, everybody, they said yes. And we've sent more ships into. Can ships alone open the strait?
No, you might get a ship to run the gauntlet one time. If you put 10 ships in a row and you have air power over there blowing everything up that moves, you might get some of those 10 ships to run the gauntlet. Is that an open strait? That's war. Who's going to insure those shipping? The United States? Not after the first two get sunk. And then what happens, the Iranians will simply change their tactics. They'll mine it. Now we have to have minesweepers clearing it. Again, air power. Where's the air power coming from? Because the Iranians have shown they can hit any airfield we want. We have to keep our aircraft carriers pulled back because they can't operate. So sustaining air, there's a difference, and people need to understand this. There's a difference between flying a long-range strike mission, which is what most of our missions in, using standoff weapons. So you'll fly to a weapons release point, you'll release the weapon, and then you'll return to your point of origin. Now you're talking about projecting power over the target. This means that you're not just flying to a point and coming back. You have to fly and then maintain a combat air patrol over this. This is what we did in Western Iraq during the Scud hunt, which I was intimately involved with during Desert Storm. We had F-15Es boring holes in the sky. We had A-10s doing the same thing. You have to come in, you have to refuel, you hang out, and then every once in a while you go back and refuel and come back to maintain the constant pressure over land, because that's what you're going to need to suppress missile drone launch operations. But air power alone isn't going to do it, and we proved that. You need to get boots on the ground. So we're going to have to, if we're going to talk about securing the straits, we're going to have to come in and take Chabahar or Bandar Abbas. Come in and secure a port, because you need sustainability. So we have to secure a port, and then we have to, basically advance up the coastline. So it's going to require, 80,000 Marines. We're going to need at least a corps of Army, 3 divisions, 4 divisions there. 24, 60, 80. You need 100,000 soldiers. And now we're talking a major war. But here's the thing: in 2019, General Berger, then Commandant of the Marine Corps, in his Commandant's guidance, said he has reviewed the directions given to him by the President, by the Secretary of Defense. He said, we can't do the job they want us to do. You see, the Iranians have standoff weapons that can strike our ships. He said, we can't use legacy systems. Right now we have amphibious readiness, ready groups that come in, like the USS Tripoli right now carrying 31st MEU. All our eggs in one basket. The Tripoli gets hit. And it will get hit if it tries to close in on the shore of Iran.
Well,
now,
that's what I wanted to ask you, the secondary, because you see this is the 31st MEU right here, and this is in the Jerusalem Post, so take that for what it's worth. It says only the MEU can conduct this operation. You just said that, maybe 80,000 Marines. This is like 2,500 actually combat Marines, I understand it, but no combat divisions. What can this one MEU do in this war, whether it's take an island or anything else? What is the combat capacity for this one organization to get done in realistic?
Realistically, it's a battalion landing team reinforced. And a lot of the reinforcements comes with logistics for sustainability ashore. There's an air wing and air component for limited vertical envelopment, some close air support. But it's basically a battalion of Marines, which is pretty good. I mean, I'm a Marine, so I'm like, yeah, it's a battalion. Battalion can do a lot, but it can't do everything. A battalion cannot force the strait. Impossible. To give people an idea of why I'm saying this, in 1975, the U.S. merchant ship Mayaguez was captured by the Khmer Rouge, and the crew was removed from the ship. We thought that the crew had been moved to an island called Koh Tang Island. And Koh Tang Island is a little bit smaller than Karg Island, which is the island people keep talking about, the Marines taking. We sent 2nd Battalion 9th Marines in to seize the island and to recover the personnel. It was a vertical envelopment. They used 11 helicopters in the initial wave. 3 of those helicopters were shot down with significant casualties on the Marines and the airmen aboard that. Of the remaining 8 helicopters, 5 were destroyed so badly that they were taken out of the battle. They limped back to ships or the shore. Some had to be destroyed on the shore. So we basically lost 8 out of 11 helicopters. Many of the Marines couldn't land because their helicopters had been hit. They had to return. Marines on the ground were in danger of being overrun. It was not a good situation. We had to bring in more helicopters and do more assaults. We lost more helicopters damaged. The thing that saved the day, and the only reason why I know this is my father played a role in this. He's a maintenance officer, and they were out of helicopters, and the Marines weren't getting off that island. But my dad found a hangar queen in Thailand and identified it and said, hey, let's get this thing up and running. There's some engine problems with it, but they got it up. It could participate. It saved 44 Marines' lives. It came in at night, did a hell of an extraction, got them on a ship. The engine eventually burned out because it was a temporary fix. But, the bottom line is we left under fire. We, the Marine Corps, left under fire, and we left 3 Marines behind. We left an M60 gun crew behind, alive at the time. They were eventually captured by the Khmer Rouge and executed. Ladies and gentlemen, I just laid out what's going to happen to any Marines that go on to Karg Island. It's going to be hell on earth. They're going to land. It's heavily defended. Trump is sitting there bragging about how he blew it to hell. The RGC said, no, we already rode out that fight. We're back. An hour later, we got our defenses full up and running. They're underground. You can't get them. And it's not 5,000 Marines and sailors. The sailors are on a ship. They're not going to do anything. They might have a SEAL detachment that joins, but, the SEALs, Marines, it's still, you're only talking about a battalion landing team. We can't do anything with a battalion landing team that's to this war. In World War II, to take islands, we took Marine divisions to do that, multiple divisions to take islands like Iwo Jima and, Tarawa and Peleliu and all that. Here we got a battalion. A battalion takes a beach. When you do a traditional amphibious assault, Red Beach 1 will be given to, 1 battalion landing team. Red Beach 2 will be given to a second one. That's just the way it works. So here they're trying to pretend that these Marines can go in and take an island. They can't take an island. They can't even come close to taking an island. In a contested island like this, it will become a graveyard for the 31st MEU.
Yeah, and that Gary, was that you're showing? Is that something that's just new? I hadn't seen that yet.
It was last night on Air Force
last
One.
night. Okay,
He basically just said, "Yeah, you're obnoxious for even asking me about the 5,000 Marines."
That's the actual central question, and that's how we're being treated. I wanted to ask you, related to that also, one of the other things that's under consideration is a lot of people are saying, look, man, we've done this before. The 1987 tanker war. Before today's war with Iran, there was the tanker war. And in 1987-88, during the final years of the Iran-Iraq War, the United States launched Operation Earnest Will, a Navy escort mission to perform oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Ended up taking out some of the Iran's Navy, and it succeeded. Now, what do you say? Is that a pattern for what can happen today, or is there differences?
A completely different environment. The tanker war was a conflict between
Got a technical glitch there. Hopefully we'll get that. There we go. Back up.
Yeah, the tanker war back then was actually a war not between the United States and Iran, but a war between Iraq and Iran. And they were in the business of preventing oil, each one of them getting their oil out. So Iran was attacking shipping, taking Iraqi oil. Iraq was attacking shipping, taking Iran oil. So we came in and escorted shipping in, daring either side to shoot at us, and they wouldn't, because this wasn't a war between. The other thing is Iran's capacity back then were very limited. I mean, they were, 1987, they were already into the 7th year of a horrific war with Iraq, one that had drained their resources, and they just lacked capacity. Today, it's the United States that is fighting Iran. So right off the bat, that redefines the whole conflict. The Iranians are now in direct conflict with the United States. And the Iranians have developed, over the course of 20 years now, capacity to shut the Strait of Hormuz down. They recognize that this is the great vulnerability of the United States and Europe and American allies. The energy security that keeps the global economy going can be made insecure in a heartbeat by shutting the Strait of Hormuz. So the Iranians have been developing the capacity. They have a brigade, the RF Brigade, which is 4 battalions of missile launchers specifically designed to shut down the strait. They don't need ships. They've got the guys ready on the other side. That's why I said the only way you're going to stop them is to put Marines on the ground and sweep up the coastline, and that's a whole different kind of fight. In a battalion of Marines, won't even seize Chabahar. you would have to come in with, a brigade. That was the mission of the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade back in 1985 when I helped plan the amphibious assault against Chabahar, because that was our mission.
Wow.
And, so it was a brigade that would go in, but we had to immediately follow on forces up to a division to come in and seize the area around it. So, this battalion, as capable as they are, they're not going to be able to do anything. They're going to have zero impact on this war.
Okay,
that's it.
Let's broaden the scope out a little bit, sir. That's at the tactical level and the things that are going on with actually confining the war. Let's take a look now at what China and Russia are saying, or how this is viewing them, because there was a lot of concern at the beginning that what would China and Russia do? Would they allow Iran to fall? Would they get involved militarily? Would they do something else? Those are the things we're not sure about. And actually, Gary, before we show this one, I want to show you Ambassador Whitaker's comment also on television, which to my ears was a little strange regarding China.
A strategic military partner means that Iran and I guess China are trying to kill American troops. That's very bad for China. That is not a good look. And President Trump and President Xi are going to have to get together and work this out, because ultimately, we cannot have a world where hostile forces, including Iranian forces, are trying to do damage and injure and ultimately try to kill American troops. And so, we need to push back every single day. China is benefiting from cheap Iranian oil. Those days are ending.
Now, I don't know about your ears, but when I heard that, I'm like, you cannot be serious. You were literally calling out China for supporting Iran that could eventually end up killing American troops. And you're the UN ambassador, or the NATO ambassador, who's the one who helps coordinate and organize helping Ukraine kill Russian troops with American stuff. How can you have such obvious duplicity and literally not even blink?
Say I'm throwing stuff at the dogs to shut them up. I think it worked. The Coke can grenade. I didn't hit any dogs. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. Just got their attention.
No dogs were harmed in the process here.
Pardon?
I was just saying, no animal was hurt in all the process.
No animal was hurt at all. I did put some Coke is spilled on the ground, and I will have to clean it up later in case my wife's watching. But look, you hit the nail on the head here. The United States is responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Russians. And, we gleefully, Whitaker brags about this, about the role we play in killing Russians. He wants to kill more. Literally, the term we use is killing Russians. We want to bring harm to Russia. We want to strategically defeat Russia. We want to bring Russia to their knees. But I come back, we want to kill Russians. Vladimir Putin met with Donald Trump in Alaska at a time when the United States was killing Russians. So Whitaker's just stupid, dumb, and ignorant. Diplomacy is the art of doing things in very difficult times. What he wants to do is have diplomacy in a perfect world where only the United States gets to kill other people. China, if I were the Chinese, in addition to telling Whitaker to shut up, I would say, well, the moment you stop sending weapons is the moment we will even begin to listen to you. Because the only purpose of sending weapons to Taiwan is to kill Chinese if we ever had a conflict. So again, the hypocrisy of the United States is unreal. But here's the real point here. The Iranians are not trying to kill Americans yet. Americans are dying. But if you look at the amount of weaponry that Iran has expended and the nature of the targets, they're not hitting personnel concentrations. They're hitting radars. They're hitting communication, the relay devices. They're hitting oil, storage. They're taking down, infrastructure. That's their priority. They're not killing people. They know where the people are. They're not killing them. And this has been their way the entire time. Go back to this strike against Al Udeid Air Base after the United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force. The Iranians hit with precision weapons. They hit everything they aimed at. Anybody who's looked at the overlay, the targeting, the battle damage on there, they hit everything they were aiming at. They didn't aim at the bunkers. They didn't aim where the troops were, because the last thing they wanted to do is kill a large number of Americans. And that's the way it is right now. There's a reason why our casualty numbers are so low. It's because the Iranians are not trying to kill Americans, and they're not trying to kill Israelis either. Take a look at Israeli casualty figures and take a look at the amount of damage that's been done there. So, unlike the United States, where I can literally point out the initial HIMARS attacks and some of the ATACMS attacks that we designated, we helped. We deliberately used them against training grounds to kill the maximum number of Russian soldiers possible. We used them against command and control facilities to kill the maximum number of Russians possible. We were in the maximum kill mode. And now Whitaker's going to lecture the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians and Chinese will not let Iran fall. Now, if Iran falls on its own volition, that's another thing. I mean, the Russians and Chinese cannot be held accountable for any political weakness inside Iran. That's an Iranian problem. But so long as the Iranian government stays in power and such, the Russians and Chinese will ensure that Iran is capable of defending itself. That's just the way it is. Russia has too much invested in the North-South economic corridor that they've been working out with the Iranians. China just opened up the new Silk Road, rail connectivity between Western China and Iran. They're not going to give that up. They have this whole plan on how to develop the Eurasian Economic Union and open up this whole new market that's going to be worth trillions of dollars. And Iran is critical to that. So the Russians and Chinese aren't going to punt on this one, ladies and gentlemen. They're not walking away. They will do what they need to do to keep Iran in the fight. But most importantly, they will do what they can do to get this war over with. The Russians and Chinese are spending far more time looking for a diplomatic solution than they are trying to figure out how to help Iran kill Americans.
Well, and I think that's really important. And to try to figure out what chances you have of diplomacy, as important as what you say and what you're doing, is also the message that's going out publicly and how public opinion, both in the United States, in the Middle East, and in China, how they are viewing a lot of this stuff tells you how much leverage and room for maneuver you have at your country. This is just one piece here. This is from the Global Times, the official Chinese Communist Party newspaper that they put out. So it's cleared by their government. So when they put this out, the security of Hormuz depended on the number of warships patrolling it. Then you can see and hear the little graphic, if people can read that, shows it Uncle Sam here building a fire and then saying, hopefully other countries will come help us put out the fire that we started. And then the article goes on to say, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi addressed this directly during phone calls with his counterparts from Kuwait, Bahrain, Pakistan, and Qatar for the exchanges of views in Iran. This war should not have happened, he said. It is a war that does no one any good, to your point there about them wanting to get it over. It is a war that, he said, noting that without the UN's authorization, the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran in the process of the ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiation, which clearly violates international law. In other words, he continued on, someone set the fire. Now they're asking the world to help put it out and split the bill. Now, what do you make of not just of the last comment there and how they obviously view that, but the fact that he's talking with his counterparts in the Middle East? And what do you think that might lead to?
Well, first of all, we know the Chinese are very capable diplomats. People may have forgotten about it by now, but it was China that reached out and got the Saudis and the Iranians down and renew diplomatic relations, something nobody in the United States thought possible or even saw coming. Our job was to keep the Saudis and the Iranians on opposite sides of the fence, ready to go to war with one another, especially the Saudis, so they could buy more of our weaponry. And suddenly China came in and made peace. And China's in the peacemaking mode. The Chinese economy is such that their need for Middle East oil makes them a very important voice to be heard by the Middle Eastern leaders. So they're not going to be dismissed out of hand by anybody. And so the Chinese are making the phone calls necessary to create the conditions conducive for the kind of compromises that'll be necessary for this war to end. You can start parsing out the terms being used by Donald Trump, and you can begin to see, the outline of an off ramp, one where we declare victory. I mean, you hear the president declaring victory every day. We've won, we've destroyed them, we've done this, we've done that. The key to declaring victory, though, is that the war has to end. And in order to get the war to end, you have to have Iran agree to bringing this war in. That way the president can say, I ended the war. And I don't think Russia or China are going to argue with the president taking credit for this, because they don't care about domestic American politics. What they care about is the larger geopolitical and economic picture, which has Middle East oil flowing again. That's their number one concern. But they also, remember, the Russians are the ones that have continually said that the war in Ukraine can only end. There can only be a ceasefire when the root causes of that conflict are addressed, because it doesn't want to have a ceasefire and then 5 years later be fighting the same war. When the war in Ukraine ends, that's it. There will be no more wars. That's the Russian goal. The Iranian goal is when this war ends, there will be no more war. And one of the Iranian demands, and we saw that articulated by their foreign ministry just last.
And we seem to be stuck again. I'm sure it'll pop out.
Okay, I think we're back. Yeah. We saw that just last night. They said one of the things is the United States has to leave the Middle East, that the day of having bases everywhere surrounding Iran is over. And what's interesting is that China is working with the Gulf Arab states right now, and the Gulf Arab states are starting to say, we don't know if we want the Americans back, that when this is over. So, and the United States may go for that because the bases are destroyed. It will cost us tens of billions, if not more, to reconstitute capacity at these bases. And so I do think we see the potential of that. And also, if the war is over, if Trump declares victory, then he can do things like say, well, we'll lift sanctions, which is an Iranian demand to lift economic sanctions. Reparations, probably not going to happen, but I think the Chinese can get Iran to back off on that one. Maybe reparations for murdered school children or something of that nature. We did a similar thing to the passengers on an airplane we shot down previously. So we might see that. But I do think we're starting to see the basic pieces of a compromise deal. But the president, he's going to have to pick the right time, and he can't announce that until the Russians and Chinese come to him and say, all right, we got the Iranians on board. So I think there's a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes right now to get the Iranians to where they need to be. Israel is a wild card. What's Israel going to do? Because even if the United States leaves the Middle East, if Israel's continually positioned itself to strike, so there's going to have to be some sort of guarantees from the United States to keep the attack dog Israel back, or the Gulf Arab states are going to have to form an anti-Israeli coalition so that if Israel goes against war against one, they go against a war against all, and Israel won't do that. This will probably unfold in the next week or two. This war can't go on much longer, Colonel. The American economy won't stop. Gas was $3.11 last week. It's $3.75 now. And I don't know what it's going to be in a week, but I don't think it's going down. The price of oil is going up. It was $95 this morning. It's up to $105, $106, maybe even higher at this point in time. The president can't let this thing go on forever. All this talk about the war can continue until September. No, it can't. The war will continue, I think, another couple of weeks, and then Trump will be working with the Chinese and the Russians to find a way that he could declare victory and get that diplomatic off-ramp.
Yeah, and I'm all about him. He can say whatever he wants as long as we get this war off the table. Yeah. In the few minutes we have here, I want to look a little bit at the Russian side, but even more so than that, I want to look at what may come on the other side of this. You just mentioned here about that the Chinese side is already talking to the Gulf countries, and once this is all over and settled, a lot of them are going to be going, should we keep ties to the United States or not? There was a piece in Russian media this morning, which I think captures it. I've heard this from other places. I've heard this from an American source, too, that a lot of people are seeing, not that one, Gary, this one right here. A lot of people are seeing the no, wait a minute. That isn't the right one. Yeah, it is the right one. Sorry. A lot of people are seeing Arakchi in particular, but the Iranians is kind of a David and Goliath thing, that they stood up to the United States when nobody else has in decades. And they're seeing a new hero has emerged. This is from Russian media on social networks. It's not Donald Trump, Elon Musk, or Inman. This is Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arakchi. From time to time, he appears on American airwaves, which with quotes and speeches, blah, blah. Went on to basically say, because they haven't been cowed. They weren't like Venezuela, which, they had one big hit and everybody surrendered and laid down. A lot of other countries hadn't, even Iran last year, but now they're standing up. And if they come out of this with terms anywhere close to what they have set out here, and that most of the world recognizes that they succeeded and that we failed in our military objectives, what is the ramifications going forward? And especially if you can kind of characterize this with BRICS, how does that play into all this?
Well, Iran was invited to join BRICS as a full-on member. They are a full-on member, but that was under previous President Raisi and his foreign minister. Raisi was very bullish on BRICS, and when his helicopter went down in May of what was it, 2024? That was the Iranians were struggling. The new president, Pezeshkian, and Arakchi, the foreign minister, they weren't bullish on BRICS. They're actually very pro-Western. I mean, the Iranian president has been saying we need to have better relations with the West, and Araghchi was saying that's the direction we should be going. We're not too sure about jumping with 2 feet with this big pivot to the east. Well, thank you, the United States, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, because we've taken 2 people who were ready to work with us, and we've turned them dead set against us. But Araghchi's very impressive. I had the privilege of meeting him in September of last year when he and the Iranian president, who I also met, came to the General Assembly and spoke in New York. They had a little gathering of Western journalists who came together and could ask questions. And Araghchi's a very sharp guy, very knowledgeable, very patriotic. But his depth of knowledge, he's a very competent individual. So this is a man, when he speaks, he's not just saying, politically motivated words. These are words attached to a deep fundamental understanding of not just Iran, but how Iran interacts with the region. And if there ever was going to be a man that can help heal the wounds of war, it's Araghchi. I'm not worried about the Iranians emerging from this war cocky and that's not who they are. They're not looking to dominate the region. They just want to live in peace and harmony with sanctions lifted so their economy can function the way it's supposed to. And Araghchi is the man to make that happen. I think, he will emerge as a regional rock star, as a global rock star, if he can survive. Unfortunately, he's a marked man, and both the Israelis and the Americans understand just how influential this man could be in a post-conflict environment. And I would not be surprised if trying to kill him, but I just hope for our sake, because this is truly one of the smart men who has a good moral compass. He needs to survive this war so he can lead Iran out of this. That would be the best interest of the United States. But we may kill him. And then what? Then we get a more conservative man. It's like killing Ali Khamenei. Now we have his son who is more conservative, not as capable. If you kill Araghchi, who's one of the most capable diplomats the Iranians have, you're not going to get somebody of a similar quality. You're going to get somebody who has resentment, is seeking revenge, and will make the post-conflict period, more problematic.
And I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying without thinking of that Secretary of War. I mean, Secretary of State Mark Rubio, who seems a lot more interested in military affairs than any kind of diplomacy. So we don't need another one of those on the stage. Listen, in the last few minutes we have here for you, I want to put up one other thing. So forget about diplomacy for the minute, where all that stuff been going, and even other than the large arc there, that there is no clearly evident militarily attainable target the U.S. can go. So we got into a war, now we don't have a military way out of it, so we have to figure something else out. Well, if diplomacy doesn't work, and if we don't get a situation where we submit to anything the Iranian side is asking, there is another possible alternative that's been kicked around here. Now, I'm going to show you something that a former Speaker of the House of the United States said on Fox News here recently, and he's going to be referring to something that on the surface of it is supposed to be supposedly a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. But you'll see that with Newt Gingrich here, he doesn't seem to be joking with this, and I would like your view on it. He writes, instead of fighting over a 21-mile wide bottleneck, we cut a new channel through friendly territory, a dozen thermonuclear detonations, and you've got a waterway larger than the Panama Canal, deeper than the Suez, and safe from Iranian attacks. Now, you even see that this, I guess, Grok or something on the bottom of it said, this originates from a satirical article, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure Newt Gingrich would say, oh, I was just kidding. But I'm telling you, there are people who are thinking about that very outcome. What do you think about even the thought of using nuclear weapons if this doesn't go our way?
Well, first of all, people need to understand that this is part of our nuclear posture. If we can use nuclear weapons preemptively, meaning we can use them without a weapons of mass destruction trigger or a nuclear trigger. It's not a purely deterrent weapon. It's designed to be used. It can be used preemptively, and it can be used in a manner where significant numbers of American troops are put in harm's way. We're not going to sit back and do nothing if 40 to 50,000 American troops are suddenly in danger. We will do what it takes to save these troops, and that includes the potential use of nuclear weapons in a preemptive fashion. And so if this war go south, we exhaust our missile interceptors on land and at sea. Remember, the only thing that keeps the carrier battle group viable is the fact that it's surrounded by Aegis-class ships that have SM-3 Block 2s, SM-6s that can shoot down missiles. We have a finite number of these, and when we run out of them, the carrier battle group is literally defenseless, and we'll have to withdraw. Our airplanes operating on bases, when we run out of missiles, we got nothing. The Iranians aren't going to run out of missiles. So if you can't find an off ramp, there could be a situation where significant numbers of American troops are now in harm's way, and we can't defend them. And at that point in time, the United States doctrinally can most definitely use nuclear weapons. It's something that it's just doctrinal. I would also point out, though, and Pete Hegseth, even I don't like the man, he said this once. I mean, maybe he forgot about it, but he said every time when we had exercises where we used nuclear weapons and thought we could have a limited nuclear war, it always bounced back and forth and finished with a global exchange. This is a very dangerous situation for the United States to use nuclear weapons. People need to remember the environment that we're operating here. The last remaining arms control treaty between the United States and Russia, New START, expired on February 4th. There is no more arms control. In fact, both sides now, especially the United States, are increasing the number of deployed nuclear weapons. We're going in the wrong direction. And there's no framework of limitation. We have nuclear anarchy right now. And you throw into that situation where we start using nuclear weapons, it's not going to be what Newt Gingrich says. We use nuclear weapons, we're going to begin a process that doesn't end until everybody in the world's dead from a general thermonuclear exchange. So nuclear weapons aren't the answer. And I hope there are people telling this to Donald Trump, although we know the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told him we can't keep the Strait of Hormuz open, and Tulsi Gabbard told him there will be no regime change, and he still went to war on the premise that we would change the regime and we could keep the Strait open. But somebody needs to continuously remind this president that we can't use nuclear weapons. That is not the answer. It will only create, basically life-ending consequences. We need to get out of this war, and the Russians and Chinese know that. And they're working to help create an off-ramp that will give the president face-saving, some sort of face-saving mechanism.
Well, let's pray to God that that's exactly what happens, because it's just unthinkable what could happen if we go down a dark path. But listen, really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. Really value your observations, especially your experience as a Marine and a diplomat. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.